The gravel crunched under Daniel's tires, a sound as familiar as his own heartbeat. Dust, a fine ochre powder, plumed behind the sedan, settling on the sun-baked wild grasses that lined the driveway. He killed the engine, and the sudden quiet was startling, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. The air, thick with the scent of honeysuckle and dry earth, filled his lungs, a stark contrast to the exhaust fumes and damp concrete of the city he'd left behind. His childhood home stood before him, a 2-story farmhouse painted a faded butter yellow with a wraparound porch. The porch swing, still adorned with the same floral cushions from his adolescence, swayed gently in an imperceptible breeze. A terracotta pot overflowing with petunias sat on the railing, their vibrant purple petals a splash of color against the weathered wood. Everything was exactly as he remembered, yet somehow different, imbued with a quiet resilience that mirrored his own complicated feelings about returning. He sat for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, a wave of nostalgia washing over him. This place held so many memories, scraped knees, whispered secrets under starlit skies, the comforting smell of his mother's baking on Sunday mornings. He left with such certainty, convinced the world was out there waiting for him. And in many ways, it had been. He'd built a life, a career, a semblance of independence. But the certainty had blurred, replaced by a low hum of dissatisfaction, a feeling of being adrift in a sea of his own making. Coming home felt like both a retreat and a reconnaissance mission, a chance to recalibrate. He finally pushed the door open, the old hinges groaning in protest. The screen door slammed shut behind him with a familiar thwack. As he made his way up the worn stone path, he noticed the rose bush his grandmother had planted, still thriving against the side of the house, its crimson blossoms a testament to enduring life. He ran a finger over a velvety petal, the faint prick of a thorn a small jolt of reality. The front door opened before he could knock. His mother, Brenda, stood framed in the doorway, a warm smile gracing her features, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore a simple apron over a pastel blue dress, her hands dusted with flour. The scent of yeast and cinnamon wafted from within the house, instantly transporting him back to his youth. "Daniel, honey, you're finally here." Her voice was soft, laced with genuine affection. She pulled him into a tight embrace, her arms feeling surprisingly strong. He buried his face in her shoulder, inhaling the comforting scent of lavender and the familiar earthy smell of her skin. For a moment, he felt like that lost little boy again, seeking solace in her unwavering presence. "Hey, Mom," he mumbled into her shoulder, a lightness he hadn't realized he was missing settling in his chest. She pulled back, her hands cupping his face, her eyes the same shade of hazel as his own, scanning his features. "You look a little tired, but good. Come in, come in. I just pulled a batch of sourdough from the oven, and I've got some iced tea waiting." He followed her into the cool, dim interior of the house. The living room was exactly as he'd left it, the antique rug with its faded Persian pattern, the overstuffed armchair by the fireplace, the bookshelf overflowing with well-loved novels. Dust motes danced in the slivers of sunlight filtering through the drawn blinds. "It's good to be back," he admitted, sinking onto the worn sofa. Brenda bustled into the kitchen, returning a moment later with a tray holding 2 tall glasses of iced tea and a plate piled high with thick slices of golden-crusted bread. She sat opposite him, her movements efficient and graceful. "So, how was the drive?" she asked, pouring him a glass of tea. Long, but peaceful once I got out of the city sprawl. He took a large gulp of the refreshing liquid. This is perfect, Mom. Thank you. They talked for a while about his drive, the mundane details of his job, the weather. Brenda listened intently, her gaze unwavering, picking up on the nuances in his voice that he himself hadn't consciously registered. He felt a familiar comfort in her presence, a sense of being truly seen. Then, almost casually, as she buttered another slice of bread, she said, "Oh, I saw Connor's mom at the grocery store this morning. She mentioned he's in town for a few days." Daniel's hand, reaching for another piece of bread, paused midair. A jolt, sharp and unexpected, went through him. Connor. The name, unbidden, conjured a flurry of images. Summers spent exploring the woods behind their houses, whispered secrets under the cover of darkness, the easy camaraderie that had once defined his world. He hadn't seen Connor in years, not since a brief, awkward encounter at a mutual friend's wedding. "Oh, really?" His voice was a little too casual, betraying the sudden thrumming beneath his skin. Brenda nodded, her eyes twinkling. "Yes, she said he's helping his dad with some repairs on the old barn before it gets too cold. He's staying at their place, just like old times." She paused, taking a slow sip of her tea. "You two should really catch up, Daniel. It's been far too long. He asked about you." A nervous excitement fluttered in Daniel's stomach. The thought of seeing Connor again after all this time was both thrilling and terrifying. There were so many unspoken things between them, so many years of silence. He'd spent countless hours dissecting their past, wondering what could have been, what might have been different if he'd been braver, if he'd understood himself better. "Yeah, maybe," he managed, trying to sound nonchalant, though his heart was already quickening its pace. "I mean, if he's not too busy with the barn." Brenda smiled, a knowing glint in her eyes. "I'm sure he'd make time. You two were inseparable once. It would be good for you both, I think. You've always had a way of bringing out the best in each other." She reached across the table, her hand gently covering his. "Don't be a stranger, honey. Give him a call." He met her gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. His mother, as always, knew more than she let on. She saw the longing in him, the quiet yearning for connection, the subtle ache he carried. And perhaps she also saw the lingering ghost of a friendship, a bond that had been integral to shaping the person he was. The thought of reaching out to Connor, after all this time, felt monumental. A door, long since closed and gathering dust, had just been nudged ajar, and the idea of stepping through it, into the unknown territory of their shared past and uncertain future, filled Daniel with a profound sense of anticipation. He picked up a piece of the sourdough, tearing into its soft interior. The taste was familiar, comforting, but his mind was already miles away, envisioning a face he hadn't truly seen in years, a voice he hadn't heard, a presence that had once been the cornerstone of his world. Coffee and old jokes. The comforting aroma of roasted beans and warm milk embraced Daniel as he stepped into the daily grind, a local fixture seemingly untouched by time since his high school days. He spotted Connor easily, settled into a well-worn leather armchair by the window, a steaming mug clutched in his hands. Connor's hair, a shade lighter than Daniel recalled, caught the morning light, and a relaxed smile bloomed on his face as their gazes met. "Miller, you old dog." Connor's voice, a familiar balm of deep resonance, cut through the cafe's low hum. He rose, pulling Daniel into a firm, unhesitating hug. It wasn't a perfunctory greeting. This embrace lingered, radiating genuine warmth and a shared history. "O'Connell," Daniel responded, the name feeling utterly natural, like a key finding its perfect, long, unused lock. He pulled back, a true smile supplanting the polite city mask he often wore. "Still rocking the flannel, I see. Some traditions endure." Connor chuckled, a rich, easy sound. "And you're still making keen observations. What can I say? It's a classic." He gestured to the vacant chair opposite. "Coffee's on me. What's your poison these days?" "Just a black Americano, please," Daniel said, a peculiar lightness settling over him. He watched Connor approach the counter, his stride confident and unhurried. There was an undeniable solidity to Connor, a grounded presence Daniel often felt he lacked. When Connor returned, placing a steaming cup before Daniel, their conversation flowed with an effortless grace that belied the intervening years. They spoke of mothers, the local football team's fortunes, and the absurdity of modern pop music. Laughter came readily, punctuating old jokes and forgotten anecdotes that resurfaced like buried treasures. Daniel found himself recounting a particularly embarrassing sophomore year escapade involving a purloined garden gnome and a very irate Mrs. Henderson. A story he hadn't recalled in years. Connor's booming laugh filled their corner, drawing a few amused glances. "I swear, she chased us for 3 blocks with a broom," Daniel gasped, wiping a tear of laughter from his eye. "And you just kept yelling, 'Faster, Daniel, faster!'" "Well, you were carrying the gnome," Connor retorted, still grinning. "And it was a magnificent specimen, I might add. Worth the risk." The hours dissolved, marked only by the dwindling coffee in their mugs and the lengthening shadows outside. Daniel felt an unburdening he hadn't realized he carried. With Connor, there was no need to perform, no need to curate his thoughts. He could simply be. "So what's the plan for the next few days?" Daniel asked, swirling the last cold dregs of his coffee. "My mom's already envisioning a grand tour of every antique shop within a 50-mile radius, but I'm open to alternatives." Connor leaned back, a thoughtful expression creasing his face. "Well, I was thinking we could hit the old hiking trail tomorrow, maybe go fishing on the lake the day after. And there's that new brewery downtown everyone's raving about." He paused, his gaze meeting Daniel's. "Look, Daniel, my place is pretty central to everything we'd want to do. And it's expansive. Got a spare room, naturally. No point in you trekking back and forth from your mom's every night, especially if we're out late. Why not just crash at my house for a few nights? Make things easier." The invitation hung in the air, unexpected and generous. Daniel felt a faint flush creep up his neck. Staying at Connor's house was a different proposition than a coffee meeting. It hinted at a deeper intimacy, a softening of the boundaries that had, until now, remained firmly drawn by their individual lives. He pictured Connor's childhood home, the familiar creak of the stairs, the scent of wood smoke from the fireplace. It was a place steeped in shared history, a backdrop to countless sleepovers and whispered secrets. He thought of his small, tidy room at his mother's, long outgrown and now filled with boxes of old books and forgotten trophies. It was comfortable, yes, but it felt temporary, a brief stopover. Connor's offer, however, felt like an extension, a continuation. "Are you sure?" Daniel asked, striving to keep his voice level, to betray none of the complicated feelings stirring within him. "I don't want to impose." Connor waved a dismissive hand. "Nonsense. It'll be great. We can actually catch up properly, not just over coffee. Think of it as a base camp for our grand adventures." He grinned, that easy, familiar grin melting away Daniel's reservations. "Besides," Connor added, his voice dropping slightly, a hint of earnestness beneath the casual tone, "it'd be good to have you around." That last part, the simple admission, sealed it. Daniel felt a quiet warmth spread through his chest. "Okay," he said, a genuine smile gracing his lips. "Okay, yeah. That sounds perfect." A subtle shift had occurred, a quiet reordering of their proximity. The boundaries, once distant and distinct, now felt a little closer, a little more permeable. As they gathered their coats, the afternoon sun streaming through the cafe window cast long, intertwining shadows that stretched out before them, a prelude to the days to come. Unspoken proximity. The credits for a forgettable sci-fi flick scrolled up Connor's colossal TV, painting the living room in a cool blue. Midnight was long past. Daniel vaguely recalled staying up this late at Connor's as a kid, fueled by cheap cola and youthful exuberance. Now a pleasant fatigue seeped into his bones, a quiet contentment he hadn't realized he'd lacked. Connor stretched, a languid, unhurried motion that pulled his t-shirt taut across his chest. "Man, that was a movie." His chuckle, a low rumble, vibrated through the couch cushions. "Still want to tackle the guest room, or are you too wiped to navigate my laundry labyrinth?" Daniel blinked, the question catching him off guard. The guest room had been the unspoken plan. Laundry labyrinth? Connor grinned, pushing himself upright and raking a hand through his perpetually disheveled hair. "Yeah, it's a bit of a disaster zone. Plus, I moved some boxes in there. Might be simpler if you just crashed in here. My bed's pretty massive." He gestured vaguely toward the hallway, his tone utterly casual, as if suggesting they split a snack. A strange current, barely perceptible, coursed through Daniel. Share a bed. With Connor. His straight childhood friend, always a steady, uncomplicated presence. The thought wasn't alarming, not precisely, but it certainly wasn't normal. Yet the prospect of retreating to a separate, chaotic room suddenly felt superfluous and a little isolating. Sure," Daniel found himself saying, the words smoother than anticipated. "If you don't mind." Connor merely shrugged, already heading down the hall. "Nah, it's all good. You know I don't snore." Daniel followed, a warmth spreading through him that had nothing to do with the late hour or the home's comfortable temperature. Connor's bedroom was sparsely furnished, a comfortable chaos of clothes draped over a chair and a stack of books on the nightstand. The bed, as promised, was immense, a king-sized ocean beneath a dark blue duvet. Connor pulled back the covers on his side, then gestured to the other. "Make yourself at home." Daniel hesitated for only a second, then shed his jeans and t-shirt, leaving him in his boxers. He climbed in, the sheets cool and crisp against his skin. Connor, already beneath the duvet, retrieved his phone from the charger, scrolled for a moment, then set it aside. The room plunged into near darkness, save for the faint glow of the digital clock on the dresser. They lay in silence, the only sounds the soft whir of the ceiling fan and the distant chirping of crickets. Daniel stared up at the shadowy ceiling, keenly aware of the warmth emanating from Connor beside him. It wasn't an oppressive heat, but a comforting, solid presence. He waited, subtly, for Connor to shift, to establish that invisible boundary typically defining shared sleeping arrangements between friends. A pillow barricade, a subtle turn of the back, anything to signify platonic distance. But Connor didn't. He lay on his back just as Daniel did, arms resting atop the duvet. His breathing was even, relaxed. There was no tension in his posture, no carefully constructed space between them. Daniel could feel the slight give of the mattress from Connor's weight, the subtle vibration of his movements. It was an unspoken proximity, a natural closeness Daniel hadn't experienced with anyone in years, certainly not with a friend, and not in this particular context. A quiet curiosity began to unfurl within him. Was Connor simply oblivious? Or was he so comfortable, so unburdened by the unspoken rules that governed Daniel's own internal landscape, that this was simply normal for him? Daniel found himself studying Connor's profile in the dim light, the strong line of his jaw, the slight curve of his lips, even in repose. He looked utterly at peace. Daniel, however, was anything but. A strange mixture of warmth and confusion swirled inside him. It wasn't an unwelcome feeling, but it was certainly new. It felt like a door had been quietly pushed ajar, revealing a path he hadn't known existed. A path leading to a landscape he couldn't yet decipher. He closed his eyes, letting the quiet intimacy of the moment wash over him, a potent, disarming sensation. This was more than just sharing a bed. This was something else entirely, and he had no idea what to do with it. Sleep, when it finally came, was deep and dreamless, a testament to the unexpected comfort he found in Connor's unwavering, unthinking closeness. Echoes of childhood sunlight filtered through the unfamiliar curtains, painted stripes across the quilt. Daniel lay still, acutely aware of the space beside him, now empty. The indentation on the pillow, the subtle coolness where another body had been, spoke volumes. A phantom warmth still clung to him, a ghost of shared heat that settled deep in his bones, not entirely unpleasant, not entirely understood. He pressed his palm against the mattress, tracing the faint outline of where Connor had slept. It was a warmth that transcended physical temperature, a feeling of being wholly present, wholly seen, in a way he hadn't experienced in years, or ever. A knock, then the creak of the door. Connor, already dressed in a faded band t-shirt and cargo shorts, leaned against the frame, a coffee mug steaming in his hand. "Morning, sleepyhead. Thought you might want some of this before it gets cold." Daniel pushed himself up, trying to project an air of nonchalance. "Thanks." He took the mug, the ceramic radiating a comforting heat against his fingers. "Slept okay?" The question felt loaded, even though Connor answered without a flicker of anything other than genuine ease. "Like a log. That old bed still got it." Connor grinned, a flash of white teeth that always seemed to put Daniel at ease, even when his own internal landscape was anything but. "Figured we could hit up Maria's for breakfast. After that, I was thinking about the old creek. See if our fort's still standing. The creek. The fort. Words that conjured a rush of images. Muddy boots, scraped knees, the thrill of clandestine missions into the overgrown woods behind their houses. Daniel felt a genuine smile spread across his face, pushing away the lingering confusion from the night. The fort? You think it's still there? Only one way to find out, Connor said, already heading out of the room. Maria's ice cream and diner hadn't changed a bit. The same checkered floor, the same scent of frying bacon and coffee, the same perpetually cheerful Maria Sanchez behind the counter, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. Daniel Miller, Connor O'Connell. Maria's voice was a warm embrace. Look at you two, all grown up, still causing trouble, I bet. She enveloped them both in quick, strong hugs that smelled of vanilla and cinnamon. Sit, sit. The usual? They nodded, and Maria bustled away, already yelling their order to the kitchen. As they waited, sipping their coffee, Connor gestured around the diner. Remember that time we tried to convince Maria that if we ate enough ice cream, we'd turn into superheroes? Daniel chuckled, the memory vivid. She just gave us extra sprinkles and told us to aim for good grades instead. Maria reappeared with 2 plates piled high with pancakes, bacon, and scrambled eggs. You boys were always full of ideas, she said, setting the plates down with a flourish. Daniel, you were always the quiet planner. Connor, you were the one who'd charge in head first. She winked. Some things never change. After breakfast, the creek was as they remembered it, though perhaps a little wilder, the path more overgrown. They pushed through tall grasses and low-hanging branches, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and growing things. The sun dappled through the canopy, creating shifting patterns on the forest floor. This is it, Connor said, stopping at a cluster of gnarled oak trees. Or where it used to be. Sure enough, half buried beneath a thick layer of moss and fallen leaves were the skeletal remains of their childhood fort. A few rotting planks, a crooked branch that had once served as a support beam. It was dilapidated, reclaimed by nature, but undeniably theirs. Daniel knelt, brushing away leaves to reveal a faint carving in one of the remaining planks. D+C. Etched crudely with a rock. He traced the letters with his finger, a pang of something bittersweet in his chest. We thought this was indestructible. Connor knelt beside him, his shoulder brushing Daniel's. We thought a lot of things were indestructible back then. His voice was softer, laced with a wistfulness Daniel rarely heard from him. Remember the time you convinced me we could catch a leprechaun here? And you spent hours digging for a pot of gold, Daniel countered, a genuine laugh bubbling up. You were so disappointed when all you found was a rusty bottle cap. Hey, it was a shiny rusty bottle cap, Connor defended, nudging him playfully. And you were just as excited when we thought we saw fairy lights. They sat there for a long time, the quiet hum of the forest enveloping them, exchanging stories, each memory a thread weaving them closer together. The easy camaraderie of their youth settled over them, a comfortable blanket. But beneath it, for Daniel, that strange warmth from the morning pulsed. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was something new, something indefinable, stirring in the echoes of their shared past. The old fort, crumbling and broken, seemed to hold more than just memories. It held the fragile beginning of something entirely unfamiliar. Vulnerability by the Creek. The creek, a meandering ribbon of cool water over polished stones, hummed with the drowsy drone of summer insects. Sunlight dappled through the canopy of old oaks, creating shifting patterns on the moss-covered banks where Daniel and Connor sat. They'd been silent for a while, the comfortable quiet that only shared history could forge, watching dragonflies dart and dip. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and sun-warmed pine needles. "Remember that time I fell in right here?" Connor eventually broke the spell, a low chuckle rumbling in his chest. "Third grade, thought I was a ninja warrior, tried to jump across. My mom was furious I ruined my new sneakers." Daniel smiled, picturing the gangly, determined boy. "I remember. You cried for an hour." Connor nodded, kicking a small pebble into the water. "Yeah, well, it was a big deal at the time. Everything felt like a big deal then." His voice softened, losing some of its usual buoyant edge. "High school was different. Less of the big deals, more of the little ones that just piled up." Daniel turned to face him fully, a prickle of unease touching him. Connor rarely talked about anything beyond the surface of high school, usually brushing it off with a general, "It was fine." "What do you mean?" Daniel asked, keeping his voice gentle, sensing a shift in the current between them. Connor picked up a smooth, gray stone, turning it over and over in his fingers. "Just felt like I was always on the outside looking in. Not like I didn't have friends, you know, but it was always a performance. Trying to fit in, say the right thing, laugh at the right jokes, like I was wearing a mask. And most nights, I just wanted to rip it off and disappear." He paused, then added, almost to himself, "It got pretty lonely sometimes, even when I was surrounded by people." The confession hung in the air, unexpected and stark against the easygoing image Daniel had always held of Connor. He'd always seen Connor as the effortlessly popular one, the natural leader, while Daniel was the quiet observer. To hear that Connor, too, had felt that profound isolation stirred something fierce and protective in Daniel. He wanted to reach out, to reassure him, to somehow go back in time and tell that lonely high school boy that he wasn't alone. Instead, he just listened, letting the weight of the moment settle. "I never knew that," Daniel said, his voice a little hoarse. "I always thought you had it all figured out." Connor gave a small, wry smile. "Yeah, well, I was good at pretending, I guess." "You always saw through it, though, didn't you? That's why I always liked being around you. No need for the mask." He finally met Daniel's gaze, a flicker of something raw in his eyes before it was quickly masked by his more familiar warmth. "Anyway, enough of that maudlin stuff. Let's head back. I'm starving." The abrupt change of subject didn't erase the vulnerability, though. It merely tucked it away, a newly discovered secret thread woven into the tapestry of their shared history. Daniel felt a quiet ache in his chest, a yearning to understand more, to offer comfort. But Connor was already pushing himself up, brushing leaves from his shorts, the moment of raw honesty fleeting. That night, the cicadas hummed their nightly symphony outside Daniel's window, a familiar sound that had anchored his childhood summers. The air conditioning hummed softly, a counterpoint to the natural world. He lay on his side, facing away from Connor, whose even breathing filled the space beside him. The day had been full of unspoken tenderness, of rediscovered rhythms and comfortable silences. But it was the quiet confession by the creek that echoed loudest in Daniel's mind. He shifted slightly, pulling the sheet higher over his shoulder. The mattress dipped, and then a light touch. Connor's arm, heavy and warm, brushed against Daniel's bare bicep. It was an accidental contact, a natural consequence of two bodies sharing a space too small for true separation. Daniel held his breath, every nerve ending in his arm suddenly hyper-aware. He waited, expecting Connor to shift away, to reclaim his personal space. But he didn't. The arm remained, a subtle, unwavering presence. A shiver, not of cold, but of something far more complex, traced its way down Daniel's spine. It was a jolt of awareness, an electric current that hummed beneath his skin. The warmth of Connor's arm was a physical affirmation of a connection that had been growing all day, all week. It was an intimacy that transcended friendship, an unspoken language spoken through the soft brush of skin in the quiet darkness. Daniel's heart began to beat a little faster, a silent drum against his ribs. He closed his eyes, acutely aware of the weight of Connor's presence, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the soft press of his arm against his own. Neither of them moved, neither pulled away. The boundary between them, once so clear and defined, had softened, blurred, and perhaps, for the first time, ceased to exist. The unspoken routine. Days bled into each other, marked less by the calendar and more by the subtle shifts in light that filtered through Daniel's childhood bedroom window. A week, perhaps more, had passed since his arrival, since that first tentative shared bed. Now it was simply their bed. A familiar landscape of rumpled sheets and the lingering scent of two different colognes. The initial awkwardness had dissolved, replaced by a comfortable rhythm, an unspoken routine. Connor would often still be awake when Daniel climbed in, propped up against the headboard, scrolling through his phone or reading a worn paperback. Daniel would slide under the covers, a comfortable distance initially, which by morning would invariably shrink to a few inches, their arms occasionally brushing, their knees sometimes knocking in the quiet dark. Daniel found himself looking forward to these nights, to the quiet companionship that preceded sleep. He'd lie there, listening to Connor's even breathing, feeling the warmth radiating from the body beside him. Sometimes, when he thought Connor was asleep, he'd allow himself to turn, just slightly, to watch the faint outline of his friend's face in the moonlight, the sharp planes of his cheekbones, the slight curve of his lips. It was a dangerous game, one that fueled the quiet hum of longing beneath his ribs. One morning, Daniel woke to find Connor already awake, propped on an elbow, watching him. The sun, a pale gold, spilled over Connor's shoulders, backlighting his messy hair. There was a softness in his gaze, a quiet intensity that stole Daniel's breath. Connor didn't immediately look away, instead offering a small, sleepy smile. "Morning," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. "Morning," Daniel managed, his own voice hoarse. His heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He felt a blush creep up his neck, a warmth that had nothing to do with the morning sun. Later that day, as they sat on the porch swing, watching the setting sun paint the sky in fiery hues, Connor's hand, resting on the wooden armrest between them, subtly shifted. His pinky finger grazed Daniel's. It was fleeting, barely there, yet it sent a jolt through Daniel. He didn't pull away. He couldn't. He just sat, perfectly still, his breath hitched in his throat, acutely aware of that feather-light contact. He glanced at Connor, who was staring out at the horizon, a thoughtful expression on his face. Was it accidental? Or was it deliberate? The question clawed at him, a relentless refrain. Connor had always been a physically affectionate person, quick with a back pat or a friendly arm around the shoulder. But these touches felt different. They were softer, longer, laden with an unspoken weight. When Connor helped him carry a box of old books from the attic, their hands brushed, and Connor's fingers lingered for a beat too long, a warm pressure against Daniel's palm. When they were washing dishes side by side, Connor would sometimes lean in, his arm pressing against Daniel's, a comfortable, almost possessive closeness. Each incident, however small, was amplified in Daniel's mind, dissected and re-examined. He'd replay them, searching for clues, for anything that might confirm or deny the burgeoning hope within him. But then, the logical, self-preservative part of his brain would kick in. He's straight, Daniel. He's your friend. You're projecting. The internal conflict was a constant hum, a dull ache beneath the surface of their easy camaraderie. One evening, after dinner, they were clearing the table. Daniel reached for a stack of plates, and Connor, reaching for the same stack, inadvertently caught Daniel's hand. Their fingers intertwined, not in a clumsy accident, but in a soft, lingering hold. Connor's thumb brushed lightly over Daniel's knuckles. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The clatter of cutlery from the kitchen seemed miles away. Daniel met Connor's eyes. They were wide, a little unfocused, and held a depth Daniel hadn't seen before. A silent current passed between them, thick and electric. Then, as quickly as it had come, the moment shattered. Connor cleared his throat, a faint flush rising on his neck, and gently released Daniel's hand. "Sorry," he muttered, his gaze dropping to the plates. "Clumsy." "No, it's fine," Daniel managed, his voice barely a whisper. He turned away, his own face burning, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. Clumsy? Was it? Or was it an escape hatch, a familiar excuse to retreat from something too potent, too undefined? Daniel carried the plates to the sink, the phantom warmth of Connor's hand still imprinted on his own. The unspoken routine of their shared nights, the casual intimacy of their days, was weaving a complex tapestry, each thread tightening around Daniel's heart, pulling him deeper into an uncharted territory he both yearned for and feared. The line between friendship and something more was not just blurred, it was actively dissolving, leaving Daniel suspended in a beautiful, terrifying ambiguity. A shoulder to lean on. The late afternoon sun, a dappled mosaic through the oak, patterned Daniel's living room floor. Golden dust motes danced, illuminating the faded blues and grays of the old sofa. Daniel, splayed with a paperback tinted on his chest, watched Connor wrestle with the remote. "Ah, here we go." Connor's voice, a low triumph, preceded the screen's flicker to life. The vibrant, slightly blurry animation of a cherished childhood cartoon burst forth, its tinny, upbeat theme song instantly pulling Daniel back to simpler times. Cross-legged mornings, precarious bowls of sugary cereal. Connor settled into the cushions with a soft sigh, his head finding its natural hollow on Daniel's shoulder. It was a gentle weight, a familiar warmth seeping through Daniel's thin t-shirt. The cartoon's boisterous antics faded to a distant hum as Daniel's breath hitched. He felt the warmth of Connor's hair against his neck, the soft brush of an earlobe. Connor's scent, clean, outdoorsy, subtly unique, drifted, intoxicating in its quiet proximity. Daniel's muscles tensed, an electric current spreading. Every nerve ending became hyper-aware of the contact, its profound intimacy. He tried to steady his breathing, to feign indifference, but his heart hammered a frantic rhythm, a drum solo announcing his internal chaos. He shifted infinitesimally, a subtle, almost imperceptible movement, an attempt to re-establish the comfortable, platonic boundaries they'd always known. But Connor, oblivious, or perhaps keenly perceptive, leaned in a fraction more, settling deeper into the curve of Daniel's shoulder. A silent counter-motion effortlessly closed the gap Daniel had tried to open. Daniel felt the faint stubble on Connor's jaw graze his skin, a shiver tracing his arm. He swallowed, throat suddenly parched. The cartoon played on, a comforting backdrop to the quiet storm brewing within him. He felt the even rhythm of Connor's breath against his collarbone, the slight movements of his head as he watched the screen. Connor's presence was a palpable, warm weight, simultaneously grounding and destabilizing. "Remember this episode?" Connor murmured, his voice muffled against Daniel's shirt, a low vibration resonating through Daniel's chest. "The one where they try to build a rocket out of cardboard boxes?" Daniel managed a strange chuckle. "And it predictably fails, sending them into Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning petunias." He recalled the vibrant slapstick, the exasperated squawking of the cartoon's grumpy neighbor. "Exactly." Connor lifted his head, just enough to meet Daniel's gaze, his eyes crinkling with shared amusement. The proximity was disarming. Daniel saw faint freckles dusting Connor's nose, flecks of gold in his hazel eyes. For a beat, the world narrowed to just them, the cartoon a silent movie. Then, as quickly, Connor's head dropped back to its resting place, attention returning to the screen. The moment, charged with unspoken possibility, evaporated, leaving Daniel both relieved and a little bereft. He tried to focus on the cartoon, to lose himself in its simple narrative, but his mind kept circling the weight on his shoulder, the warmth of Connor's presence. It felt both utterly natural and utterly foreign. This wasn't how they used to watch cartoons. This wasn't how they used to inhabit each other's space. As the afternoon light faded, casting longer shadows, Daniel found himself unable to move, a willing prisoner to the quiet intimacy that had settled over them. His arm, initially stiff and awkward, now felt strangely comfortable, as if it had always been meant to be Connor's resting place. He wondered if Connor felt it too, this subtle shift in their gravitational pull. Or was it just Daniel, adrift in a sea of his own making, projecting desires onto an innocent gesture? He wanted to believe it was more, that Connor's easy closeness wasn't merely habit, but something deeper, something resonant. A soft sigh escaped Connor, a sound of contentment. "This is nice," he mumbled, his voice thick with the beginnings of sleepiness. Daniel's heart gave another lurch. "Yeah," he replied, the word a little breathy, a little hoarse. "It is." He closed his eyes, letting the warmth of Connor's head on his shoulder, the gentle rhythm of his breathing wash over him. In that quiet, shared space, Daniel allowed himself to simply be, to lean into the uncharted territory they were slowly, unknowingly exploring together. The cartoon played on, a soundtrack to the slow unfolding of something new. Hearts Laid Bare. The credits for the cartoon had long since rolled, the soft glow of the television now replaced by the muted light filtering in from the street lamp outside. Daniel and Connor remained on the sofa, the comfortable silence stretching between them, thick and warm like a well-worn blanket. Daniel could feel the slow, steady rhythm of Connor's breathing beside him, the lingering warmth of his head on his shoulder. He hadn't moved, hadn't stirred, and a strange sense of peace settled over Daniel, pushing back the earlier rush of frantic uncertainty. "Remember that time we tried to build a raft to sail down Miller's Creek?" Connor's voice was a low rumble, breaking the quiet spell. Daniel chuckled softly, the memory vivid. "It sank before it even touched the water. We spent the rest of the afternoon fishing out soggy branches." "Yeah, but we were so convinced it was going to be the next Huckleberry Finn adventure," Connor added, a smile audible in his voice. He shifted slightly, lifting his head from Daniel's shoulder but not moving away. Instead, he turned, his knee brushing Daniel's as he faced him. The dim light sculpted the familiar planes of his face, the slight stubble along his jawline catching a faint glint. "Everything felt so monumental back then," Daniel mused, looking past Connor, out the window at the familiar silhouette of the oak tree in the yard. Every scraped knee was a battle scar, every summer day an epic saga. "And now?" Connor prompted gently, his gaze unwavering. Daniel sighed, a deep exhalation that seemed to carry the weight of the last few years. "Now, it all just feels like a blur. Like I'm constantly chasing something I can't quite grasp. That sense of purpose, that unshakable belief that something incredible is just around the corner. It's gone." He paused, a strange vulnerability unfurling in his chest, a feeling he hadn't anticipated sharing. "I feel like I'm just drifting, Connor, going through the motions. Like I packed up my life, moved to the city, chased a dream, and now I'm just here. What's the point?" Connor listened, his expression unreadable in the dim light. But Daniel felt an unspoken understanding radiating from him. There was no judgment, only a quiet attentiveness that encouraged him to continue. "I had all these grand plans, to be this successful architect, to leave my mark. But lately it just feels like I'm pushing paper. The passion, the drive, it's just not there. And it scares me. What if this is all there is?" Daniel finally met Connor's eyes, a raw honesty exposed in his own. Connor reached out, his hand finding Daniel's, his fingers wrapping around his. The contact was gentle, a comforting pressure that settled some of the turmoil in Daniel's chest. His thumb stroked the back of Daniel's hand, a small, soothing gesture. "It's okay to feel lost, Dee. We all do sometimes," Connor said, his voice soft but firm. "Life isn't a straight line. Sometimes you take a detour, sometimes you hit a dead end, and sometimes you just need to pull over and figure out where you're going next." He squeezed Daniel's hand reassuringly. "What matters is that you're still trying to figure it out, that you're still looking for that thing that ignites you." The warmth of Connor's hand, the quiet understanding in his words, resonated deeply within Daniel. It was a comfort he hadn't realized he desperately needed, a balm to the anxious churning of his thoughts. He squeezed back, a silent acknowledgement of the connection between them. "I just wish I knew what that was," Daniel confessed, his voice barely a whisper. "I miss that feeling of certainty, of knowing my path, like we had when we were kids, even when we were building a raft destined for the bottom of the creek. Connor smiled, a genuine, easy grin that softened the lines around his eyes. Maybe that's the trick, Dee. Maybe it's not about finding the path, but about enjoying the journey, even when it's a bit messy. And hey, he nudged Daniel gently with his elbow, at least you've got good company for the ride, right? Daniel laughed, a genuine, heartfelt sound that surprised him. The tension that had been coiled tight in his shoulders began to loosen. He looked at Connor, really looked at him. And for the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel quite so daunting. In the quiet intimacy of that moment, with Connor's hand still holding his, Daniel felt a flicker of something new, something hopeful, stirring in the quiet corners of his heart. It wasn't the grand purpose he'd been searching for, but it was a beginning. A warm, undeniable presence that felt exactly right. Yeah, Daniel breathed, his gaze lingering on Connor's face. Yeah, I do. The weight of unspoken words. The digital clock on the bedside table cast a quiescent red glow. 2:17 a.m. Daniel lay prone, eyes fixed on the ceiling, a shifting canvas of shadows courtesy of the streetlights beyond the blinds. The air in Connor's guest room, thick with the scent of aged timber and his friend's subtle cologne, felt almost substantial. Connor's steady, even breaths punctuated the silence, a rhythmic counterpoint to Daniel's own tumultuous thoughts. A subtle alchemy had transpired since their earlier conversation. Connor's gentle assurance, it's okay to feel lost. The journey itself, especially with good company, is what truly matters. Now nestled in Daniel's chest like a warm ember against a landscape of quiet desolation. It offered no grand solution, no sudden revelation, but rather a comforting hand extended in the encroaching dark. Sharing this bed, their close proximity amplified the resonance of those words, twisting them into something far more profound than simple camaraderie. He stirred, the duvet's soft rustle a disproportionately loud sound in the stillness. Connor remained undisturbed. Daniel fixated on the subtle rise and fall of Connor's chest, the slight movement of his pillow. This shared quietude, this unspoken understanding, brought a strange solace, yet it was also a torment. Every nerve ending hummed with an acute awareness of the warmth radiating from the man beside him, the silent invitation of his presence. His mind replayed their shared laughter over dinner, the way Connor's hand had briefly, inadvertently, brushed his arm as they reached for the same wine bottle. Innocent instances, now magnified and distorted under the heavy weight of Daniel's burgeoning feelings. He wondered if Connor sensed it too, this almost electric current that seemed to vibrate between them. Or was it merely his own yearning projected onto an easy friendship? The thought was a cold douse of water, extinguishing the fragile warmth that had begun to blossom. He closed his eyes, willing his heart to slow, his thoughts to subside. He was a guest in Connor's home, in Connor's bed. This closeness was circumstantial, a vestige of childhood sleepovers, nothing more. He had to remember that. A soft exhalation escaped Connor's lips. Daniel's eyes flickered open. Connor stirred, a slow, deliberate shift. Daniel held his breath, feigning slumber, though his body was rigid with anticipation. Connor rolled onto his side, facing Daniel. Even in the pervasive dimness, Daniel felt the intensity of his gaze, a palpable pressure on his face, his chest. He kept his eyes clenched, his eyelids twitching with the effort to remain motionless. The silence stretched, taut and trembling. Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs like a frantic bird in a cage. He was acutely aware of Connor's warm breath on his forehead, now closer. He could almost feel the heat emanating from him. The air thrummed with unspoken questions, with an almost unbearable tension. Then, a measured, unhurried movement. A hand, warm and calloused, lifted from the pillow. Daniel's breath hitched. He felt its momentary suspension, a whisper of air mere inches from his skin. Time seemed to distend, elongating into an eternity. He braced himself, uncertain what to expect, but knowing, with a deep-seated certainty, that whatever transpired next would irrevocably alter everything. The hand descended, gently, hesitantly. Fingertips grazed his temple, then slid downward, cupping his cheek. The touch was feather-light, yet it carried the weight of 1,000 unuttered words. It was tender, searching, a silent query posed in the velvet darkness. Daniel's breath escaped in a ragged gasp he hadn't realized he was holding. He opened his eyes, blinking once, then again, to meet Connor's gaze. Connor's eyes, typically so clear and affable, were dark pools in the faint light, reflecting an unfamiliar depth. They were searching, vulnerable, an open book. His thumb stroked Daniel's cheekbone, a slow, hypnotic rhythm. It was a gesture of such profound intimacy, so far beyond the established boundaries of their long friendship, that it stole Daniel's breath. The contact ignited a spark, a wildfire spreading through his veins, chasing away the cold tendrils of doubt. In that moment, suspended between the veil of sleep and stark wakefulness, between the past and an unknown future, Daniel knew. This wasn't merely comfort. This wasn't solely friendship. This was something new, terrifying and exhilarating, blooming in the quiet space between them. The burden of unspoken words pressed down, but now, a new word, a more dangerous word, began to coalesce, trembling on the edge of his consciousness. Desire. It hung in the air, a potent, undeniable presence, as Connor's thumb continued its gentle caress, blurring the demarcation of their world. Connor's thumb traced the line of Daniel's jaw, a feather-light touch that nonetheless sent a jolt through him. The air in the room, already thick with unspoken sentiments, seemed to thicken further, pressing down with a tangible weight. Daniel's breath hitched, caught somewhere between his chest and throat. He wanted to speak, to ask, to clarify, but the words were lodged, unable to escape. The silence stretched, profound and resonant, punctuated only by the soft rhythm of their breathing and the distant chirp of crickets. Connor's hand, so warm against his skin, slid from his cheek to cup the back of his neck, his fingers tangling gently in the hair at Daniel's nape. It was a gesture of profound tenderness, a silent question that pulsed between them. Daniel's own hand, still resting on Connor's hip, tightened almost imperceptibly. He felt a tremor run through Connor, a subtle vibration that matched the trembling in his own core. The world outside the bedroom, the city lights, the late-night hum, all faded into irrelevance. There was only this room, this bed, and the electrifying proximity of their bodies. Then Connor shifted, his body turning more fully towards Daniel, their knees brushing. He leaned in closer, his warm breath ghosting over Daniel's lips. The scent of him, faintly woodsy, undeniably Connor, filled Daniel's senses, a comforting anchor in a sea of overwhelming emotion. Daniel's eyes, which had been fixed on the shadowy outline of Connor's face, darted to his mouth, then back up to meet his gaze. Connor's eyes, even in the dim light, seemed to hold a vast, unreadable depth. "Daniel," Connor whispered, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through Daniel's bones. It was a sound laden with a vulnerability Daniel had rarely heard from him. I haven't been able to sleep. Not properly, anyway. Not since you got here." Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs. He wanted to respond, to offer some comfort, but his tongue felt thick. He could only listen, his entire being focused on Connor's words. Connor swallowed hard, the slight bob of his Adam's apple visible in the gloom. His thumb, still at Daniel's neck, began a slow, rhythmic stroke. It's been a lot," he continued, his voice barely audible. "Having you back, it's felt different." Daniel nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. He knew exactly what Connor meant. He had felt it too, this subtle yet profound shift in the landscape of their long-standing friendship. "I keep thinking about everything," Connor went on, his voice gaining a fragile strength. "The nights we've spent talking, the way we just fit, the way it feels when you're close." He paused, and Daniel could feel the weight of his gaze, searching, probing. "And then tonight, with everything, with you here." Daniel held his breath, anticipating, dreading, hoping. He could feel the tension radiating from Connor, a palpable energy that mirrored his own. This was it, the moment of truth, the precipice they had been teetering on for days. Connor's hand moved from Daniel's neck, his fingers gently tracing the curve of Daniel's ear, then brushing against the stubble on his cheek. His eyes, now closer than ever, seemed to plead for understanding, for acceptance. "Daniel," he whispered again, the sound raw, almost broken. "I think I've fallen in love with you." The words hung in the air, shimmering and fragile, yet incredibly powerful. They resonated deep within Daniel, echoing through the hollows of his chest, settling in the very core of his being. It was as if a dam had burst, releasing a torrent of emotions he had kept locked away, a flood of relief and wonder. The surprise was overwhelming, a dizzying rush that stole his breath, yet beneath it was a profound sense of rightness, of coming home. He stared at Connor, his mind reeling. The world tilted on its axis, a silent, momentous shift. The admission was so unexpected, so direct, that it robbed him of any immediate response. He had yearned for this, fantasized about it, but to hear it spoken aloud, in the intimacy of the dark, was something entirely different. It was real. Connor's face, etched with a mixture of fear and hope, was inches from his own. His eyes, wide and searching, held Daniel's gaze, daring him to look away, yet simultaneously begging him not to. Daniel could feel the rapid thump of Connor's heart against his own chest, a frantic rhythm that mirrored his own soaring pulse. Daniel reached up, his hand trembling slightly, and cupped Connor's cheek. The skin was warm beneath his palm, real and tangible. You felt a tear track a path down Connor's temple, cool against his fingers. Connor had been holding his breath, waiting. Daniel's own eyes welled up, a sudden rush of emotion that blurred Connor's face into a shimmering halo. He found his voice, a husky whisper he barely recognized as his own. "Connor," he breathed, his voice thick with unshed tears. I don't know what to say." Connor flinched, a subtle recoil that spoke of his raw vulnerability. "You don't have to say anything," he whispered back, his voice thick with emotion. "Just tell me I haven't ruined everything." Daniel shook his head, a single tear escaping and tracing its own path down his temple. "No," he managed, his voice stronger now, filled with a burgeoning hope. "No, you haven't ruined anything. Not at all." He squeezed Connor's cheek gently, a silent affirmation. The air crackled between them, no longer with tension, but with something new, something nascent and potent. The whispers in the dark had changed everything.